Are you feeling uplifted? Yes? Perfect. The rest of the conference will be based on solutions, and hopefully you'll be feeling more uplifted, but I thought it was important to talk about the growth. Each year I tend to choose specific topic that I want to focus on, and for me this year I really wanted to talk about soil health and how if we treat our soil properly, knowing that right now organic matter is pretty much decreasing all the time in our soil, which we're in a state of desertification, that also in return contribute to climate change. So how can we manage our soil better, and how can we use soil health as an ally to fight climate change? And for those who read or geek, I don't know that the next. I'm not sure that the next guests need an introduction. As Mathieu Beauchemin posted a few days ago from Domaine du Nival, he said, "When you know, you know. You want to go to the conference to hear Marc-André Selosse." Marc-André Selosse is a professor at Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle in Paris. Is a very accomplished author. You probably read some of his book, L'origine du monde, Jamais seul. Um, Marc-André focus on ecology and the evolution of mycorrhiza and the major symbiosis between soil fungi, roots, and most land plants. So today he will give us a presentation. He's a very, very good communicator. So he's excellent in taking something that's quite complicated as a topic and making it easy for us to understand. So Marc-André is very busy. I talked to him, I think it was on January 2nd, and he had about 30 presentations between that time and now. So I cannot emphasize how lucky we are to have him in the room. Marc-André, merci beaucoup.
Merci. Thank you. It's a double challenge. First, to speak after this description, which is far too positive, and the second, to speak after the far-reaching and inspiring discussion Yves-Marie was leading before, which is important, but I think that biology can bring a piece of the solution. And let's see how the soil is related in a way to some important things which may be related to the way we can handle the climate. You may know that climate is changing and that this is changing our wine. For example, we have less acidity, more alcohol. That's because it's hotter during the time of grape maturation. But also, a funny thing is that on Grenache in Vallée du Rhône, we had a size of a berry weight that went down over 30 years by 26%, meaning that the ratio of the skin to the flesh is not the same, so likely the flavor is not the same, but whatever the outcome in terms of flavor, this is a result of a change in water availability, which means that it's not only a climate change in terms of temperature, but also in water availability. And I would like to focus a bit on that. You know that the water availability is really changing the taste of the wine. And at some point, when it's too low, it's just changing the life of wines into death. So the challenge, the part of the climatic challenge we can address with the soil is really related to water. And I would like now to, among all the solutions we can imagine, and there are many others, see with you one which is on short to middle term, the one of soil management. But before managing soil, we have to know what soil is. And although most of you have the feet on soil, and most of you are fully made of soil, your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your manganese, your calcium is from soil. You are soil, okay? Despite you have contact with soil and you are made of soils, we often ignore what soil is. So let's go into that. Discuss it a bit what it is before we shift to wines and solution. Okay. The first thing is that soil, you cannot see it, but it's very living. It's a very living thing with a lot of organisms such as fungi, for example. What you see from fungi is just the way they reproduce, but daily the fungi are made of hyphae, that is small filaments that are growing in soil, ramifying, networking, and making really a network of filaments which cannot be seen by eyes and are called the mycelium. That's one of the things living in soil, which is overabundant 5 tons per hectare, but which you don't see. You don't see, But sometimes you can smell it. When you smell the soil, you have this octanol smell, which is typical for fungi. When they are hurted, they emit this. And by the way, this is something you know from wine as well, because although it's not very expected and not very wished, it's also something that can occur in wines, especially in sparkling wines. Okay, octanol, that means that you can smell what you cannot see in the soil, fungi. That's not all. There are also bacteria in soil. Bacteria are 10 times smaller than fungi, so it's 1,000th of millimeter. So it's very small. The bacteria are in groups, in cluster, or alone, and they are overabundant in soil. And some of them produce jasmine. Jasmine, oh, sorry, it's the French writing here. Jasmine is the odor of soil, and it's also something you can find sometime in wine. It's not really expected to, but that's this smell of soil is really evidence that the soil is rich in bacteria. We also have funny guys like amebas in soil. They are just having a big cell that is moving and taking over, eating, absorbing bacteria as a food source. Amebas. You may know the big ones under the name of blurbs or not. Anyway, amebas are abundant in soil. So soil is also made of roots. You always forget that, but there are as many roots as microbes in soil in terms of biomass. There are also the roots of plants. And finally, there is the life that you, I'm sure, were thinking of. Animals with columbolas, close to insect but without wings. Pseudoscorpions, not really scorpions, but big predators anyway. Very small worms called nematodes. They are like size of hyphae. Mites, huh, myriapods, and other carnivorous things like that. Worms, of course, the true worms like lombrics, for example, and also insects. It's really in soil, there is a huge diversity of groups, some of which, like worms, are not occurring on Earth, but always in the soil. Okay, 1 gram of soil, it's mostly bacterial, with several thousands of species of bacteria, 1,000 species of fungi, hundreds of species of amebas, probably 10 millions of viruses, but this we don't know really. It's for those organisms, 1 gram of soil, it's a big place to live in. So it's not surprising that they are so numerous. It's just that they are small. But they are highly numerous, and if you total all the living things in soil on Earth, you discover that depending on the estimations, between 1/4 and 60% of the living species are living in soil. So let's be clear. That's a list. But there are so many actors that they probably, and I will now show you that, do a lot of things. Okay? So many species from so diverse groups. It means that some diverse things are done by them. What is done? Huh, soil. But it's not a good news. When you look at, it's the French map of microbial diversity, when you look at the blue zones, which are the one with a low diversity, you have the agricultural part of the country. And you can see that vineyards and culture, they have a reduced diversity compared to grasslands and forests. So you can expect that something is going wrong because there is a lower number. And if there is a lower number, the functions, the usual functions of the life of soil are probably underperforming. Because what are those things doing has a name. It is called fertility. This life in soil is making fertility from everything it can use. For example, look at this fairy ring of mushroom. This is a typical mushroom that is feeding on dead organic matter in soil. And it's, of course, you now understand that what you see is not the fungus, it's the reproductive part. The fungus is a mycelium that is in a ring, okay? Why is it a ring? It's very easy to understand. This fungus is eating some part of the dead organic matter, some part of the remains of plants, for example. It grows from a central point in every direction, and when there is nothing to eat anymore, it goes to death. So it's growing from one side and starving from the inner side. this fungus is eating organic matter. And this is one function of soil, which is just degrading the organic matter. But there is an outcome of that. Look at the grass. I know if the screen is good enough for you to see that, but it's greenish where the fungus is. Now let's go to a place where there is a fair ring in spring, and we see what? In this field, for example, we see the fairy ring by way of higher growth of the plants, simply because when fungi are growing, they produce waste, exactly as you when you are producing urine. And they release nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, etc., and they are just fertilizing the plants. So the way some organisms of the soil are destroying the organic matter is just producing the food for the plant. It's their waste. And by the way, your urine is a waste that can be used to grow plants as well. Okay, so the organic matter stays in the soil and makes it brown or black, but slowly go degraded. And the product of this degradation is fertility. In the soil, there are also rocks and minerals. And rocks and minerals are also attacked by the microbial life of soil. Look, for example, at this crystal of apatite. Apatite is a phosphorus-rich mineral. It stayed 6 months in water. What happens? Nothing. Now, before you let it 6 months in water, add a few drops of soil, that is thousands of microorganisms. And after 6 months, you end up with a surface that is fully alterated, fully degraded, because they are just dissolving the rocks to get access to its phosphorus. Life in soil contains also some microbes that are just attacking the rocks to produce minerals, oligoelements, calcium, phosphorus, etc. And they're working so badly that it's leaching from everywhere. So what they dissolve is also feeding the plants. That's it. For organic matter and minerals, they are soon or later the prey of the life of the soil with an outcome which is fertility. It's nearly finished because in the soil there are also pores with water and gas coming from the atmosphere. And that's again the same, all that is used. Look, for example, from the ambient air comes nitrogen. And you will see that this nitrogen, which is not in the rocks, will end up in the soil, but this time from the gas that are entering the soil. Many of you are probably familiar of the legumes, those plants which are fixing nitrogen. I will tell you how they do that. And that are very rich in protein. That means very rich in nitrogen. They are very used to improve the soil. They are used to improve the nutrition of livestock. And also for us, those are the beans, those are the lens, etc., etc., or the soya, etc., etc. Those plants are richer in nitrogen than the soil on which they grow. Why? Simply because on the roots, they have some small outgrowths in which they harbor and feed with sugars bacteria called rhizobia. And those rhizobia, they have the enzymatic tools to transform the gaseous nitrogen, which we cannot use ourselves, into amino acids, which are the bricks to build proteins. And of course, they give a bit to the plant in exchange for sugars. When the plant is going to death, it goes to decomposition, but this time the nitrogen doesn't revert to gaseous nitrogen. It reverts to nitrate of ammonium to fertility. So sorry, the way was a bit tortuous and long, but I start with the gas and I end up with fertility. Okay, you see that in the soil there is pieces of the rocks, pieces of the atmosphere, organic matter, and all that soon or later is evolving into fertility. Okay, now let's mix a bit that, because if you produce fertility and have the rain raining and the water draining, all that, it will go out of the soil. So you need to mix a bit. Who is mixing in soils? Yeah, animals and especially worms. Look how just by moving, those worms are dismantling the nice organization of white and black strips on this experiment. You see that over several days, they will fully cancel the organization because any animal living in soil, including worms, they just mix the pieces of soil. But it's not all. The worms, they also defecate. They put their feces on the surface of the soil. And In this, there is a bit of organic matter. It's brown, okay? You can see that. But also they eat a lot of clay, which is helping them to digest and to stop the toxins entering their body. So this is a mix of clay and organic matter. They really mix it finally, and they put it on the dead leaves that just were falling and that go buried by the way of the repetitive deposits of feces. So you see that not only the way they move, but also the way they defecate is mixing the soil. They are not the only soil mixers. The plants as well, the roots of plants. Look, a plant root that is growing into the soil is an introduction of organic matter. Plants' roots, they secrete many components, mucilage, antimicrobial, etc. They put in the soil, the root system is putting in the soil 10 to 40% of the photosynthesis of the plant. And then the roots are sometimes going to death. And the plant is giving to the soil as many carbon by way of the dead root as by the way of dead leaves. That's an enormous burying of carbon, the root system. At the same time, the roots are extracting minerals which are going to the leaves. And when the leaves fall back on the soil, all the minerals extracted deeply, they go to the surface. So yes, we can say that it's a slow forming choreography. Okay, this is a mixing that happens here by life of the soil, which is very important to take back to the surface the fertility. That's not all. It's making pores. For example, it's the way the worms are going, the amoeba are going, the place where a root was living and went to death, or a filament of fungus was living and went to death. So this is making pores. And it's very important because if there was not this permanent pore production, all the pores would collapse and there would be no water and no gas, no respiration possible in the soil. So that's vital. And you can see here that the more worms you have, the more the permeability of soil is pronounced. That is necessary to allow the water to go into the soil. But that's not all. The smallest pores, the one made by moving bacteria or moving amoebas, you can find it ridiculous. They are so small that they retain the water by capillarity. So there are both big holes, like the one of worms or previous roots, which are allowing the water to enter, and there are small holes which retain the water, sucking them by capillarity. Sucking, sorry, the water by capillarity. Okay? Whew, it's nearly done. There is fertility. The fertility doesn't go down. Now let's channel the fertility to the plant, and once again, you will find that the life of soil is acting because the root alone doesn't function. Finally, we land in the 1 yard. We had to make this long way to be here. Now there is fertility in soil, and of course, there are the roots which are using that. Is it roots? You may feel from the introduction that it's not only roots. Huh? When you look carefully into those roots with the microscope, you find that there are big cells of the root, which are rectangular here, but there is also filaments of fungi growing in the fully healthy root and even penetrating in the root cells. This is what we call mycorrhiza. That is what we see as a root, rhiza, is also filled with fungus, myco. And it's healthy, and you'll see it's the way it gets in food. In the soil, the roots, I told you, are excreting a lot of signals, molecules that can be used as signals. And the fungi that are growing in soil, you see it's this glowing that is hardly visible on this screen, but when a fungus is growing, it may not be sensitive to the molecule emitted by a root system, or instead be sensitive to the other one. Then it starts to grow in the direction of the root and ramify and produce in red, not very visible here, some molecules that makes the root ramifying. So if both partners are ramifying close together, they end up by touching each other. And then the fungus will not stay very long on the surface of the root. The fungus will make its way through the root by leasing the outer protection of the cell, but not the inner one. So the cells stay fully alive, but they're just penetrated by the filaments. And at the very end, the filament starts to ramify in one cell to make this arbuscular structure that you saw already. And at this level, the fungus is channeling minerals and water to the plant, which is in yellow, channeling to the fungus sugars. The best she can do for any microbe is just to give them part of the photosynthesis. So you see that in yellow, there are those sugars going to the fungus, and this is the exchange between the partners. The mycorrhizals are also based on the fact that the mycelium of the fungus is exploring the soil up to 10 centimeters away from the root. And by the way, the fungi are producing their spores also in the soil. Let's put that with some data. We have some wines growing, some Pinot Noir growing in a vineyard soil, okay? And you can see the uptake of nitrogen and phosphorus of this plant. Now, let's add either one species of glomus, one of the fungi, or another. It's very easy to add them. You harvest spores, the small spores from soil, and you inoculate it. You see that here there is an impact on the nutrition, but which is not exactly the same for phosphorus with two strains. The enhancement is nearly the same for nitrogen, but it's not the same for phosphorus. Yes, the different fungi, they don't have the same impact on the nutrition. And it means from one site to another, the fungi that are there are not the same, and it's part of the terroir. What are the available partners and what do they provide you? You can see that here, for example, this species number 2 is less efficient to provide phosphorus. That's part of the terroir. It's not only what is in the soil, but who is there to channel it to the plant. This exchange of sugar, lipids, and vitamin from the plant against mineral nutrients and water from the fungus is very important and makes this association a symbiosis, a living together in perfect health. But it has some other impact on the plant. Indeed, there is not a single trait that is not affected by those fungi. And I just take an old walk, rather old walk, on 4 cepages from Iran with the quercetin content of the berries. It's either non-mycorrhizal in red or mycorrhizal with 3 different species separately or together. And what you can see here is that some cepages don't react strongly, but some other react strongly to inoculation in a way that depends on the fungus. And even when you mix the 3 strains, the result is a bit unexpected compared to what each strain is doing. That means that, once again, also the impact on physiology and, for example, the impact on the tannin profile of a given cepage depends on the terroir by way of which fungi are there. It's part of the terroir, and it's impacting the physiology of plant up to the berries. Can we manipulate that? You can find easily in a commercial way, you can find easily preparation of fungi to inoculate. But the problem is that they are often not local. So first, they can become invasive, and second, they are not really adapted to your soil. And if they are adapted to your soil, are they good for the wines? Not any fungus is performing with Vitis vinifera, so or even with the rootstock. So I think that the question to ask is whether you have all those points together. If you have it, then you are allowed to try. I will now report something from a company. The logo is bottom left, and I'm a scientific advisor of this company, but I'm for free. It's a startup that is coming to your vineyard or to your production of wheat or lavender or anything, taking the soil, amplifying by specific patented process the quantity of fungi, and giving you back your soil. Then there is a choice for the plant. There is local adaptation, okay? And with that, in Côte de Provence, they did with a local inoculum, an inoculation that compared to the non-inoculated plants, gave more berries per plant, simply due to more bunches per plant. That's the thing. And the interesting story I want to tell you now, coming to climate, and water is that 1 year experienced a big drought. Uh, the water stress and water status of the plant is reflected in carbon-13 content. And you see that the carbon-13 content is much lower in the one treated with the local inoculum than in non-treated plants. That means that there was less stress because of the over addition of local fungi. It was 20% more water available simply because of the job of this fungi. It allowed a 9% on this growth year, 9% growth of young plant more, and the yield of berries was 45% more, as you saw previously, on a dry year. So that means that if you handle well this system, you may improve your water management. But once again, it should be local, and it's not for sure. It's not a 100% solution like most solutions inspired by nature. Okay, so you see that there are many protective and modification uh, mechanisms behind the mycorrhizal association. But if you try to inoculate whatever you use, you will have to have good practices that respect the fungi. And we shall come back to that. If you plow, you kill it. If you till, you kill it. If you don't have vegetation in the vineyard, you don't feed the fungi in the season where the vines have no leaves. So let's come to that. The soil is a bit killed by tilling, and its ability to buffer climate change is also affected, as you will see. That's a nice picture from a countryside in France. But that's a fool for soil. That's real fool. That's the problem of tilling. And the problem of tilling is that it's aerating the soil. But first, this aeration is made with holes that are not very stable, so there is compaction coming sooner or later, especially if you come back with your machine. So the superficial pore formation is not stable. You have to till again. And by tilling, you are pushing on the zone which is just under the tilling zone. And you make what is called a plowing soil, which is very compacted, very hard. The water has problems to go through, and whenever it goes through, the roots have problems to go through as well, so they don't exploit the water under it. So plowing is just making unstable pores to be done again and killing the penetration of the water at deeper depth. Also, what you see here shows that many animals are killed by till. But also you have to think of the fungi, think of this delicate filament. In a tilled zone, you don't find any fairy ring. They are killed as well, including the mycorrhizal one. When you till, you kill the help for the roots to exploit soil. Finally, the bacteria are very happy with tilling because first, they are too small to be killed, and second, there is more air, more oxygen, so they start respiring more. And so it's not replacing the fungi. They are not doing the same job. But the result is that the soil becomes very whitish because the turnover of the organic matter is faster. And here starts a full disaster. Here starts a full disaster because organic matter, waiting for decomposition, has a role. You see here some pieces of soil which were put in water. You see that from a forest soil where there's a lot of organic matter, by the way, it's very darkish, about in 5 minutes, the piece of soil is still more or less visible. In 30 seconds in the vineyards, you just get sand. Because organic matter, I often say to my students that organic matter is a bit like that. This thing here. It's sticky. It's sticking the pieces of soil together. When you don't have it, you have a lot of erosion. But that's not all. It's really like this, sorry to insist, because this is full of water. Organic matter is storing the water. So less organic matter, less water in soil. 1% more organic matter in soil, 10 millimeter of rain retained. So the organic matter is very important for structural cohesion, fighting against erosion. It's stabilizing the porosity because it's sticking the pieces of soil at the top of the pores, avoiding a too fast collapse. It's allowing water retention directly by itself, interacting with the water, but also by stabilizing the porosity. It releases also some fertility because when it's finally degraded, attacked by the microbes, it's liberating phosphorus, nitrogen, and so on. And by the way, it's a carbon trap. The more organic matter in soil, the less carbon that is not under the form of CO2 in the atmosphere. You see that, in a way, that's also a way of handling the climate. It was mentioned that already earlier today, that the more we put organic matter in soil, the more we store it. Of course, we have not to plow. If we degrade that. What organic matter? Never burn this. Use it. Give it back to the soil, especially give it back to the soil under the plants, so that you can have a kind of mulch cover that will allow you to not use any herbicide to limit the growth of plant under the vines. So you can just cut that in pieces and put it there, but give it back to the soil. Don't burn it anymore as it was done. It used to be done in region in France. And the other thing is bring organic matter. Bring organic matter. That's simply bring this. That's the way the livestock can compensate their positive effect on gas house emission. They can also allow to produce something that will be stored in the soil. And by the way, this is often rich in nitrogen and phosphorus. So this will be at the same time as an organic matter addition, an addition of fertilizers. Waste are solution. Not all waste. I'm not speaking of plastic, okay, or heavy metal wastes. But organic waste, it's a pure marvel. By the way, you yourself in your kitchen or in your toilets are producing some organic matter rich in phosphorus and nitrogen that should go back to the fields, as it did historically before the mineral fertilizers. Yeah, because, we shifted to mineral fertilizers, so we don't need anymore to put waste, manures to the field. But the problem is that fertilizers, they go easily to the plant. That's the way they are so efficient. So when a plant has that, it doesn't need a fungus. If you are living at the first stair above a supermarket, you don't pay someone to go and bring you your food. You go yourself. And you see that here, well, it's a trifolium. I have no data on wines, but it's a general trend observed for many plants that the more you add phosphate to the soil, the less the plant is mycorrhizal. And no matter if those fungi are protecting the plant against stresses, like heating stresses. The plant doesn't need them for mineral fertility. It's just licensing, it's just firing the fungus. And no matter if there is a problem of stress to alleviate, the plant is now alone. So you see that the problem of mineral fertilizers is that they should be used. Yes, we will need to use them, but as less at the minimal level, because they are too efficient and they suppress the help of the mycorrhizal fungus. So once again, when we use that, the release of nitrogen and phosphorus is just a level that needs the presence of a fungus to compensate for the scarcity of the resources. So using as much as possible organic fertilizers, it's not only bringing organic matter to the field, but also fertilizing in a stable, sustainable way. To finish with, soil is never meant to be naked. There are always in nature plants on soil. And when we have, because we till, but especially because we don't replant after, you can till and replant. When we have bare soil, we go to something that is fully unrealistic and for which living things in soil were never selected. We have to imagine green vineyards where there is a lot of plant on the soil covering the plant. Not only this will be efficient against erosion. Those two fields are 5 meters away from each other in Champagne. We are in Montagne de Reims here. There is no discussion on what to prefer. And by the way, in this field, one activity is to take all the soil from there and put it every year there. And then it comes back. So it's kind of rolling soil. Really not what you want. Huh? Okay, the other thing is that those plants which are growing on the field between the rows of wines, they share fungi, either the spontaneous ones or the sown cereals. They, sorry, there are pieces of French here and there. That's Franglish, okay. Uh, they just have mycorrhizal fungi, some of which are shared with the wines. So they support, they pay for the mycelium at the time the wines has no leaves and cannot pay for it. So the wines, they will inherit from what the plants have been supporting during the winter time and the beginning of the spring. That's another function of those green plants, is to help maintaining the cover. And here you have an experiment of wines alone and wines with a tanacetum, um, I think it's officinale. You can see that in presence of this plant, the wines get mycorrhizal faster than when it tries to get mycorrhizal alone on a bare soil. So that's really a point of interest. You can also have plants like Phacelia or crucifers that are harvesting all the phosphorus, the nitrogen, the potassium they can, because they are very greedy. It avoid that there is leaching during winter time. And then you kill them, and the roots and the aerial part on the soil will slowly release what they stored at the time the wines were not able to catch it. So it's a kind of fertilizer, especially if you add, like here, some legumes. We are in Champagne again, and you can see that there is a high level of cereals and legumes, and this is making a lot of organic matter. By the way, that's another way of putting organic matter in the soil, but that's also bringing nitrogen from the faba beans that are there. You can also plant some plants like radish that have growing roots. They will crack the soil, they will open the soil and do the job for which you only imagine till is able to do it, while the worms and the plant with growing roots, with laterally growing, with thickening roots, are doing normally. So this is the kind of plant to add to the design. And finally, some plants can be repellents for parasites. First, the splash of the rain impedes the mildew spores from going back on the leaves. But second, and most importantly, we know now that some plants enhance or diminish pathogens. Here, this is a nematode. I showed you nematode called Xiphinema index, which is propagating virus, the virus of the short-knotted. And you can see that with some plants like Vitis Phacelia, or Sorgo, you have much more Xiphinema index on the next year, up to 10 times more. That's not what you want. But if you plant things like Avena, Medicago, Trifolium, Lupinus, sorry, the English name are not very familiar to me, but all those plants are nitrogen fixing, by the way. If you plant them, you can reduce by 2/3 the infection level of Xiphinema. So tomorrow, we will have mix of plants that will handle the pressure, of the pathogens. So green vineyard, they help mycorrhizal fungi in winter and spring. They retain the minerals and they can even fix nitrogen. They open the soil to water, they repel pathogen, and when they are dead, they just again bring organic matter to the soil, which is also good for the climate in general, but also for the water retention in soil. There is finally this problem of competition for water with the wines. That's true that when you start to have a green vineyard, you have less production because there is a problem of water. The wines have less water available when you shift to plant or to let grow things between the rows. But let me tell you that this is a myth, a true myth, because everyone can observe it, but it's just because things have been done badly. For example, here I'm in this vineyard, okay, and this hole is 3.50 meters deep. So normally, technically, you don't have the right to go into it. It's too dangerous. But I went into it, and I'm pointing with my knife here a root, 3.40 meters in the soil a root of wines. That's where the root should be, not where the root of the superficial plant are. There should be less, not no, but less competition. But there is a huge competition because most of the roots are in the 20, 30 first centimeters, at least in the 1 yards of Europe. I cannot comment on other regions of the world, but the fact is that when you are plowing, you leave space to the root of the vines to invade the surface because there is no one else, especially if you don't plant any plant, then the surface is free of competitors, the vine doesn't go down, it stays above because there is no competitors. When you put the competitors, then the competition starts. It's not that only. Because you are plowing, if you are plowing, if you have till, you start to have this plowing soil, which means that first, the water doesn't go deep, so no use to have your roots deeply. But second, and mostly, this is too hard for the wine's roots to go through. So you end up with no possibility to exploit down. Okay? If you put the fertilizers from the top, like mineral fertilizers, which is not like the organic matter that is buried and then at several depths transform into fertility. If you put mineral fertilizers from the top, the roots, they go to the top where the food is coming from. So, to make it short, we have to learn that wines have to be pruned. We know it for the IRL part. We do it every year. But we don't do it for the roots. Okay? The old people from Burgundy, they had tranche, how they call it, a tool that was allowing to cut all the roots up to 30 centimeters on the young plants. They were cutting like that. So the only way to have persistent roots was for the plant to make them going down because every year they were severing the roots at the surface. Of course, now we don't do it anymore, and it's especially because the use of mineral fertilizers makes that superficial superficial roots are more efficient. We also have to think of the density of plantation, which decreased due to mechanization. You cannot use mechanization when it's too tightly packed. But when the roots of the vines are tightly packed, the roots they tend to go down because if they go laterally, superficially, they meet the other roots of the other plants. So the density is also a way. And finally, you have to install the green vegetations from the beginning of the life of your plants so that it doesn't take those bad habits of exploiting superficial zones. So it means that green vineyards, it's something that is probably easier to achieve with less competition in newly planted vineyards than in old grown ones. Okay. Anyway, we have to keep in mind also that less water is not always a problem. Of course, it is a problem at a certain point. Well, I remember this paper that was published some time ago in 101 on water deficit on Merlot. And you can see that in the degustation, many degustators, they find more visual cues, more taste, more aroma, or more retronasal intensity in the wines the wine from the water deficit. So we also have to think that it may be also a way, to some extent, a bit of competition with plant to enhance the quality of the wine because it simply concentrates the secondary metabolites and the taste. Okay. So we are close to the end. This is the ugliest things in the world. Any mom would forget the kid to play with that and to put it in the mouth. Whereas it's more dangerous to put any plant in the mouth than a piece of soil, okay? But still, I hope I convinced you that soils are fascinating because they are field of life. And there are tons of processes that are happening there that are just making the plants and then us, ourselves, possible. But that it needs organic matter. It's endangered by till and the excess of mineral fertilizers, even if we will not whip them out fully. It needs a permanent cover of plant. And in a way, it's because it was always evolving like that. So everything in the soil is adapted to soil that are not plown, and that are covered. They are just adapted to what they've been living for millions of years. And with those tools, we may enhance the water reserve. Another way of saying that is that the soils are sleeping beauties. When you want to wake up a sleeping beauty, you don't take a metallic things to make holes into it, into her. You give her food because it's a long time she's sleeping, and you give her flowers because, well, because sleeping beauties probably they like flowers. So think of the soil as a sleeping beauty, but keep in mind that it's less funny. It's just the logic of the evolution of who is living in the soil. And on that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm open to questions if time is good.
Thank you for the presentation. It was really fascinating. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the company you said you were working with as a startup, and explain sort of where they are with their development of this process of enhancing your local fungi.
So first is that there is no conflict of interest because the scientific advisors are not paid, and I joined them because I heard of them, went to see their design, and found out, whoa, finally, it's having the list of what we should do, like not buying something coming from any other continent, not necessarily adapted to the soil, and with 2 or 3 strains, among which some may not be okay for your tomatoes, wine, or wheat. So this is a company, Mycophyto, that is based in Nice. Mycophyto, myco like a mycologist, and phyto like plant, and they are based in Nice. I know there are several other companies doing that in Europe. I don't know of any doing that in America, but I would not be surprised. And the idea is to think local. Simply you enhance what you have locally. And I don't know how you say it in English, but this is very reminiscent of what we call, when you make wine, pied de cuve. I don't know how you translate it in English. Okay, so that's pied de cuve for soil. This is just that. Locally made. And you see that sometimes handling soil resembles a bit handling fermentations of the wine. I think that you, for those of you who are winemakers, you are more prepared to make an agriculture based or congruent with microbes than any other agriculturalist or any other farmers, because you know already how to handle microbes.
Oui, bonjour. Mettons que j'ai hérité de la terre nue de mon grand-père, que vous avez montré en photo. Parce que vous avez montré plein de belles solutions si la terre est verte, mais je commence avec une terre nue comme ça.
Ouais.
Par où je commence pour m'en aller où? Parce qu'il y a plein de solutions, mais pour être le plus efficace possible.
So where to start with when you inherit from this naked soil and which was plugged over generations? Honestly, I have no solution. All I can tell you is that when you replant, and now with grafted wines, we often have to replant, okay? It's not waiting for 2 centuries. It's simply waiting for a few decades. When you replant, first you explode the soil, what's the name, by the way? Soil, till soil, that's it? I'm always lost with this word. So you have, this compacted lower layer of the soil. You have to kill it by means of exploding the underpart. But I don't know the English name of sous-solage, subsoiling. But don't do a subsoiling with moving. Do a subsoiling that makes things up and down and inject organic matter. Don't do a subsoiling that is mixing the things. That's the first advice. And then you start to replant your wines and to have a cover from the beginning on. So now, if you are just inheriting all the wines that are doing well and you want to keep them, try slowly. If you are in a region where you can irrigate, don't hesitate playing on that. But I know that in some regions, like for example in France, we cannot irrigate the wine, so it's not always possible. So try, and try also to see if you can destroy your soil, uh, your soil, your till soil. I don't know. Help me with the name of this. La semelle de labour. La semelle de labour. Till soil. I was showing that to you. Uh-huh. Oh là 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 là. Là, j'arrive pas à le faire. That's this deeply compacted zone, okay? And so, it, hard ground, yeah, well, but due to till, so you can try to kill it between the rows. It's not very easy, but there are some specialists that can do that for you, so that you get access again to the lower part of the soil for the wine's root to escape the competition with the surface ones. Those are different ideas, but whenever I say we should not do that, we should not do that, we still should do wine. So I'm prepared to the fact that in some regions, some people will tell me we cannot. But before you're sure you cannot, try in network with the others. Try also to recover the experience of the others on what may function a bit or not. You need really to network between people willing to go ahead, because it's not an easy way. It's not like conventional agriculture where everything is written in books. Here, you have to invent it locally, and you have to also network with the others. So that's the final advice. Network with other people trying or having tried to do that, and especially if they have managed it.
On a une autre question juste ici de ce côté-là.
Hello, thank you very much for a very good presentation. So my comment is that there's a misconception in Canada that the climate is heating up. It is, but what we see is very big variation in temperature. So it's very difficult. Like there's freezing, there's a lot of rain, and so we see very big changes in climate, and it's affecting the winemakers and all types of producers very strongly. So in a context of we get a lot of water, more humidity. Can you comment on the soil in humidity type climate and how to manage it?
Okay, so you are thinking of an excess of water in a way. The first thing I would mention is that it may allow to make non-grafted wines, non-grafted vitis vinifera, because as you know, when really you have for sure, but do you have it for sure? That's the problem with climate change. When you have for sure watering of the soil in winter, you may escape the grafting. I don't mean it's making better wines, but there is more and more people claiming that they make different wines with non-grafted wines, and that's an interesting option. Surprisingly, there is never excess of water in soil for the wines. Maybe some are better specialists than me, but I know some wines that are growing in Pomerol on some soil which are called gley. That is those bluish soils where the iron is reduced, and it's quite toxic for many plants. And that goes back to the natural biology of the wines, which are growing in forests, which have a very wet soil, if not forests that surround the rivers. So there is never too much of water in the soil for the wines to grow. It's just changing drastically the taste of the wines, pushing them into the excess of, at least at the time of berry ripening, the excess of water is pushing them into greenish taste, methylpyrazine, and some other stuff like that, which may be positive for some wines, but which in excess are not good. And I'd be having too much of water, more afraid for the type of wine I produce rather than for the quantity. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but then also to finish with, of course, you can try to handle the excess of water by draining. That's an option. If you have to, if you have the feeling you have to. But another way of draining the water is to plant trees. And I didn't discuss this because it was not on the timetable, but there is also this big thing that we are tasting in some vineyards such as Château Cheval Blanc in Bordeaux. We are currently trying to investigate with my research team the impact on different factors, including mycorrhizal fungi, but not only, of planting trees, either at the edge or even within the row. And this may be this is a way to first extract a bit of deep water for you, and second, to manipulate the airflow. It should be done depending on the site and the problem, but to manipulate the airflow to avoid late freezing and to avoid too much of drying of the air in the summer by cutting the wind. So think of the trees as a tool in many other respects. It's a growing fashion. As any fashion, it's sometimes a bit excessive, but it's a big fashion now to think of trees in the vineyards again. And there may be a tool to extract extra water, if you think of that, or to handle climatic problems such as late freezing and too much of dryness of the atmosphere in summertime.
Parfait, on a une autre question de ce côté-ci.
Isn't it isn't it problematic to irrigate the vines because as with the fertilizer, the root is not going too deep because it gets the water from the top?
Okay, the problem is that the water always comes from the top. Even the rain is coming from the top. Well, it depends. You may have some soils which are watered from the side, but most of the time, water is coming from the top, which is not the case for fertility. Normally, fertility is coming from the whole zone of soil where organic matter is progressively destroyed to release it. So that's the difference, okay? But you are right that when you irrigate from the surface, you make something a bit silly. You help your companion plant if your vineyard is green, okay? And you have also a bit of evaporation. So the perfect design is irrigating in the soil. But technically, this is very challenging because the roots are not stupid. They go to the pipe and then they enter the pipe. And so it's something that needs to be redone regularly. It's not so easy. There is another option. Well, so it's technically challenging, but the best option is to bring the water in the soil. Not really because it's not normal to put water on the surface of soil. It's always done like that. But because it's a way to serve in priority the wines and not the companion plants. I don't know if it's the kind of reply you wait for, but once again, it's very challenging to make deep soil irrigation. If the wine will be lazy, yes. And anyway, you know, if you start to play with irrigation, you will be, as always when you make wine, trying to stay at this limit between excess and deficit. Because, as you know, when there is excess, you dilute your wine. I don't know what you mean by laziness of the plant. I would say that the judge, the absolute judge, is the quality of the wine. So let's only see that. If a lazy wine, a lazy plant is making good wine, let's make them lazy, okay? The problem is to be just at the edge between excess of water, dilution of the material, and excess of stress. But still, you need a bit of water and you need a bit of stress because the stress is enhancing the taste. It's enhancing the production of tannins, which enhance the stress tolerance, especially by fighting against free radicals. It's enhancing also the terpenes. They are also induced because when you are stressed, you cannot cope with pathogens. So better prepare your body to be full of toxic things for the microbes than being eaten and then induce the defense. So all those compounds, they are accumulated to avoid additional problems with the pathogens and to avoid the free radicals and the problems like that. So really, you need a bit of stress. And you will have to feel what's the best in terms of quality of the juice you'll obtain. It's really navigating at the edge between excess and stress with a bit of each.
Hello, Marc-André. I would like to know what is your opinion about compost tea?
in terms of microbiology, not in terms of nutrition. Oh, both nutrition and microbes.
Composting is a bit stupid in terms of carbon, because when you compost, you have respiration, as you know, and you have CO2 evolving. So it makes the size of the organic matter smaller. You lost carbon, which for the role of organic matter in soil, remember all this list of, you have less organic matter, so you get less of this role. Of course, you keep the nitrogen and the phosphorus, and since it starts to be a bit more mineral due to the life that is mineralizing the compost, you have a better flush of fertility when you put it on the soil. But also you have more leaching. So you have to think that the more you compost, the more you go from organic matter to mineral fertilizers. Of course, with the compost, you are not very close to it, but you start to have more mineral concentration and less organic matter. So composting, it's to be on the way from pure organic matter, raw, fresh, to mineral nutrients. It's on the way, of course. So you cannot always put the organic matter directly into soil, so then compost. But whenever you can put it fresh, don't compost. Keep all the carbon under the form of organic matter. It's good for climate and good for all the other roles of organic matter I described to you in the soils. Now, there are myths about what we bring to the soil or the plant when we have decomposing things. It can be compost, it can be leaves of plant that you let decompose in water and you spray it on the plant or you spray it on the soil. There are many storytelling about that say we bring good organisms. Let us be sharp and clear. Microorganisms are like plants. There are places where they live and places where they cannot live. You don't plant your geranium on sand. Well, you can try, but you won't show them for long to people, okay? And it's the same for microbes. Some are very plastic, of course, but most have a preferendum. And when you live in a more or less anoxic or not so much aerated environment, where like compost or a kind of fermented tea of plants that is sometimes used, and then you are sprayed in a more dry environment where there is more oxygen, I can tell you, this is microbe killing. So it doesn't mean that the rest of their body or few survivors may have an impact. We can discuss that. We know that sometimes very few of one microbes is changing a microbiota. That's the reason why eating cheese, for example, is changing the microbiota in our body. It's not that the microbes of the cheese, they settle. They just disturb the way the microbiota is functioning in a way that it's functioning even better for our health. That's why we have to eat fermented food. It's not that the microbes of fermentation, they settle. It's just that it changed it's called the parabiotic effect. It's just changing the functioning of our microbiota. So it can have microbial output, okay? But don't think of it like I'm installing microbes. Especially I hear sometimes, I'm installing mycorrhizal fungi. Sorry, mycorrhizal fungi, they don't live in organic matter. They need a root. Otherwise they starve and they go to death. So there is a bit of romance here. It doesn't mean that those practices adding fermented things in big or lower amount have no effect. But first, and sorry to say that, it goes, okay, that's the point where you will start to want to kill me. You're ready? It applies to biodynamic as well. I mean, I don't mean that biodynamic is doing nothing, but this fermented feces of cows is probably not an inoculum of anything. If it is acting, and I wanted to show that to see the data, okay, it may, but it's probably not by inoculation. It's very important because it means that we have some storytelling about microbes that are just ignoring what they are really. It doesn't mean that the practices are bad. Once again, I'm not judging that. Peut-être le monsieur là.
Ici, just en arrière. Can you comment on how copper sulfate affects soil health? And is there a way to manage heavy metal accumulation?
How, please?
Can you comment on how copper sulfate
Okay.
affects soil health?
I was more or less thinking of that, but I had no time, and it was not very climatic, so I jumped over it. Because another problem, my description of the problem for soil was not mentioning pesticide. I was not just going into the debate, but another problem for soil, which I fully skipped, is pesticides. And very often it's said that bio and biodynamic, they are dirty because they use a lot of copper. Let me tell you that they are not the only one to do that. First point. So when I hear that, because often it's agitated as something against organic farming, it's too much of copper. Okay. The first thing is that it's used by other methods. The second thing is that you have to imagine that copper is highly able to link to anything. When it's meeting any kind of molecule, it's stacking to it. That's why, by the way, it's highly toxic, because most organisms, they have vital molecules that are just stacked by copper and they stop functioning. So this property makes that when it's coming to in the soil, where there are a lot of minerals such as clays, but also a lot of different organic molecules, it gets stacked in few time. And once it's stacked to organic matter on clay, it doesn't move. The problem is just newly incoming copper that is still not stacked and can enter the roots and have a toxicity. So if you don't, it's a meta-analysis of the team of Lionel Rangard in Dijon. If you don't go over 4 kilograms per hectare on years, there is the toxicity in soil of the newly incoming copper is limited, and sooner or later it's stacked to clay or organic matter, and it's done. It doesn't move anymore. So it means that to a certain level, it's okay. The problem is that 4 kilograms per year hectare, it's not a lot. I don't know in this region how you feel that, but I suspect that in America, in East America, and especially in Quebec, it may not be so easy to cope with that. I can tell you that in Bordeaux, for example, on some years, it's not enough. Yet, in Côte de Provence, or close to Perpignan, it's very feasible. It's even on some years too much, 4 kilograms per hectare. So that's the first thing. You don't have to abuse. And the second problem is that you are creating a reserve of copper in the soil. As long as you don't change your culture, it's okay. But if you shift to another culture, like cereals, for example, it's really the example, then the exudate of the roots are different, and the exudates, they can remobilize the copper. So it means, in a way, that using copper makes the soil stuck into winemaking, which is good and not good, okay? In Romanée Conti, let's go on. I'm not sure that, for example, today in Bordeaux, where there is overproduction, some people, they don't want to shift to something else, and they will have problem to shift to a different culture. So you create an inheritage that is potentially dangerous. So copper is not perfect, but among all the pesticides we have, it's probably one of the less dangerous, at least for soil. I don't say it's good. I say there are many other priorities. And I think that by not mentioning copper and other priorities, I did a good job in terms of priority. But it doesn't mean that if we can whip it out, you know that on the leaves there are protective mites, the tiflodromes. You may know it or not. It's a huge protection for the leaves. 1 per leaf is sufficient to protect the whole leaves against fungal germination, because they're just eating the fungal germinations, okay? And if you put copper, you kill them. So you kill the bad guys, but you kill the helpers of the leaves. There's some talk of mine on the microbes and animals helping the wine on internet, that you can figure out for all these bacteria, fungi, and mites that are helping the leaves to be safe. So the copper, the other problem is that it's not selective. It's killing everyone, bad and good guys. So you are more dependent on further protection on the next day. That's the other problem of copper, not very specific. So it's not perfect, okay? But still.
We will take one last question right here, and then
I
the
just,
next
well,
panelist.
so my question was regarding tilling, but before, I just wanted to know, following on the compost question, would you say, for example, it's because a lot of producers we compost our pumice, the leftover after pressing. Would you say it's better to put it directly in the vineyard before composting it? Or that's the first question. And the other question I wanted to ask is, what's reasonable for tilling? I mean, we're producers, we know eventually we might have to till. Is it, if we till every 2 years, it's okay for the fungi to
Try to escape the rule.
already? Or 4 years. I know it's better to never till, but what would be reasonable?
I will start with this. What is reasonable is what you can do, but sincerely, please. Okay, because there are some soils in which, when, for example, there is a lot of silt, it's not possible not to plow in the current knowledge, especially in wet climates. I know such soils in Brittany, for example. It seems they are not very frequent in 1 year, the soils, but some soils, silt-rich soils, you have to plow. So maybe you will have to do it. Some people, they tell me, if I don't do it too often, yes, but every time you do it, it's killing something. And it's making you having less spores, having less organic matter, and you enter in a system where you have to correct. So the best is to avoid it when it's possible. If it's not possible, okay, make it as much as rarely as possible. Some other people, they tell me, but I don't go very deep. I make only 30 centimeters. The problem is that the abundance of life with the depth is a curve like that. So you start by having 80% of the life in the 21st centimeters. And wherever you are plowing or even making anything in the soil and disturbing the soil, you start from the surface. So you start from the most living part. That's the drama. So do what you can, but yeah, the idea is to try to minimize. And if you start to minimize by doing it less often, I think it's a good thing. But once again, think of this thing that I never know the foutu name, this compaction of the soil under it. That's something that is adding up, even if you don't plow every year. Now, it's a too technical question for me, what you could make with your waste, because I don't know the specific attributes. And I suspect that there is a lot of reduction there and that a bit of aeration is not bad before putting it to the field. And who says aeration says that there will be a bit of decomposition, a bit of composting. The other thing is that it depends also of the region, because you will put your waste on the soil when worms are active and able to, by just pooing, to bury it. If it's at a very dry season, it may be a bit problematic to put it on the soil. And then if you have to store, then composting is a solution for waiting without problems or bad smells. Okay, it's a very technical question. And honestly, I prefer to tell you that I don't know in the case of your specific waste, because once again, generality are one thing, but every waste has a potential that is not exactly the same as another one. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.